Hello, my name is Imogen Caterer, and I'd just like to talk to you about, where some of our feelings come from, how we can get stuck on a particular issue, and start maybe making foolish decisions around it. I'm going to give an example as a particular incident that happened in my life recently. I put on my first webinar, which is a sort of online seminar. And I was a bit stuttery during it, and I know why I was stuttery during it. I just kind of overplanned it, got over concerned about it, which is a little bit where I don't have my understanding going too well, that I wasn't more at peace about it, and I tried too hard and sort of rehearsed in my head and whatever. And ended up, with 5 hours of material for a 1 hour webinar, and then had to try and cut it down live on the webinar. So that's why I got a bit sort of stuttery. I realised, I think, at the time that it wasn't that serious that it was happening. Certainly isn't a fundamental flaw in my ability to speak. So I came off that webinar, and because I'd been over planning, of course, the speed of my thought had been a bit higher than it should be, and I kind of hooked on in many ways to my kind of less than perfect performance in this webinar, and then was in a slightly disaffected mood. On the other hand, I also had kind of almost a top note going on as well, because a happy top note, because for me, I'd been honest, authentic. You can't really tell if you've connected with an audience on a webinar, but I felt like I was speaking from the heart as well. So I kind of had a bit of both going on at the same time, so I came off. I was slightly disaffected. Now I got some lovely feedback from that, and I'm very grateful for those who wrote in, and I could see from various measures that it had gone okay. But I somebody criticised me in a Facebook group that I hang out in, and is about sort of reforming, how we treat mental health. And I kind of latched onto it because I had a slightly kind of disaffected mood, sort of, can never remember this word. Disaffected, dissatisfied, there we are. Dissatisfied kind of feel to me. I kind of latched onto him. So it looked like something from the outside, this comment, had upset me, but actually in truth I was upset anyway. And then I latched onto this comment. And the correspondence continues, and he was saying things like, frankly, I was disappointed, and you should get some public speaking training. And, then he attacked what I'd been saying in the webinar. And he did say, I think you're a really lovely person and all this. Well, I didn't see any of that, and I suppose I have thinking inside me that goes, if you attack somebody, criticise them off, when they've obviously been a bit vulnerable, then whatever you say next isn't going to really count. And so I hooked in, and there was a bit of discussion and so on. And eventually he says that, like, does it help? Does it really help that you always assume what I'm saying is negative? And somebody else said that as well. And if I'd been in a very, very, very bad state, I'd have carried on anyway. But I had enough insight at that moment to go, oh, wait a minute, what's happened here? And looked back and said, right, I've hooked on to this particular situation, and I've called it like, this is a problem, this individual is a pain, and I'm going to argue with them and try and justify myself. And I could only see that one thing. And you know what? Don't we do that a lot? Isn't that what so often we get hooked on this one thing? And I can remember numerous occasions, but I can remember it as a certain thing I mentioned in my webinar about a job that had gone wrong, and I hooked on it and hooked on it and hooked on it. And that's it, you hook on it and your focus goes there, and you don't see the bigger picture. And what these principles do is help you see the bigger picture. Now, what you need to do in order to do that is step back and start taking down the amount of whizzy thought that goes around in your head, and start stepping back, and then you'll begin to see that there's another world out there, and there are other possibilities out there. And also, one criticism from a webinar doesn't beat the 3 or 4 or whatever people came and unsolicited made a comment direct to me about that webinar, a positive one. But I'd lost sight of that in favour of there's this problem. So then I stepped back and I just let it sit. And eventually one's perspectives kind of opens up again, and you see a greater world, and you get insights into your behaviour, or sometimes into bigger things than that. And I could see the insight I got from that was, hold on, I do this dissatisfaction a lot. This is some of the structure of what led to me, whizzing around my thoughts trying to control things, that tired out my nervous system, and ended up earning, if that's the right word, me a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So there I can see now, and it's kind of wow, because I'd kind of before, and I'd given an example in the webinar of kind of, if you think this must happen in order to make you happy, then if it does, you might be happy, because it's not inevitable you will be, even because thought is arguably random. and if it doesn't happen, you may well set yourself up for being unhappy. Now that's linking it to like a narrow belief, but somebody who says I'll be happy when has a degree of dissatisfaction in them, because otherwise they wouldn't be saying well, I'll be happy when. It would be I'm happy now, and I may have preferences, but that's not the same thing. But this was much more an awareness that you can be in a state of dissatisfaction. And when you begin to see that you've been in a state of dissatisfaction, you can set it aside and feel more at peace. And that's been that's been one of my insights that's come out of this, is just to be more at peace. Now, you may say, well, what did you do about this person who challenged you on a Facebook group? Well, he's private messaged me a few times. I haven't been rushed to respond, because one of the things that happens is when you're hooked on a problem, it seems really urgent, and when you're not hooked on a problem, you kind of take it as perspective. I'm having a nice weekend, thank you. I'm not rushing. And he's not hanging around in the back of my mind going, when should I reply to that person? When should I reply to that person? That's another feature of it being a problem. It's just, it'll get done when it gets done. I'm not going to forget it's there. It's still fairly high up my private messages section of Facebook. So it'll be done when it's done. It's not urgent. Nothing he's saying is urgent. So. And we can be much more at peace in this set. And will I occasionally go in and get hooked on a problem again? Oh yeah, because I'm human. But as time goes by and as I get more into this understanding, I get less hooked onto those problems. And I snap out of it sooner. And granted, I should know not to reply at all when I'm in that state. But occasionally I miss that. Occasionally I respond to somebody who has said something to me when I'm, not in the best state for answering. And of course, one of the reasons why that statement, I felt so much irritation with it is he was reflecting back what I believed about myself, that I was dissatisfied with my own performance. So, I felt like I had to fight that, because So deep down I felt my self-esteem was at risk or something. But all of that comes from being dissatisfied. And you know what? If I'd been in a completely high place coming out of that webinar, if I'd been, oh, that went really well, I would not have reacted at all to that comment. Or I'd have said, sorry, it didn't work out for you. I'm getting some nice comments, but sorry, it didn't work out for you. Or at a slightly lower state, I'd have dismissed it with, a cheeky comment or something. But it was only in the lower stages, lower levels of consciousness, caused by, overly fast thought, that that I went and reacted the way I didn't mean to. One thing that occurred to me is somebody's remarked to me that, well, shouldn't you just sort out only your negative thoughts you put to one side, instead of keep the positive ones? Well, that to me is a misunderstanding of the system, because if you're speeding thoughts like this, sorting out which are the good ones and which are the bad ones, it's going to be a lot of extra work and more thinking. But the other reason is that thought, what your perception is of the world, how you're thinking about it, what are the circumstances, what you reckon is going on, okay, is even if it seems to be good, it's still your own impression of the world, getting more and more hooked in your own personal impression of the world. The other side to that is if your speed of thought goes down, what comes in is wisdom, known as mind. I think I refer to it in the webinar. Wisdom, mind comes in, and that comes through and gives you all these lovely insights, where you can suddenly see, where you can change your attitude or behaviour to something that's going to work better for you in the world. So whatever thinking, and the idea isn't to get rid of kind of absolutely all of your thinking and thoughts, because you need some, and it's mind, consciousness and thought together that create the world. But what I'm talking about is the personal thought that's kind of or I think this, I think that, I think the other. Even if it's good, it's still your perception of the world, rather than divine insight coming through. And that insight, as I mentioned, can be as banal as helping you find your keys, or it can be, a massive insight like I'm loved, like, well, mine was, that I was running quite a lot of dissatisfaction, and that was what was creating a lot of my overthinking and desperate need to control things, which I share on occasions. So, yeah, so this is something that's got better for me. By the way, you don't need to have all this commentary to understand it. The understanding is just suddenly seeing it, not necessarily needing to understand all my commentary on it. I'm just trying to explain it for you. So as that understanding has got clearer and faster, I come out of these moods faster. I see what I'm doing faster. I see that I've got hooked on something and need to expand my awareness faster. And that's been a blessing for me. Thank you very much for listening. Oh.